Okay, let's do it. Okay, so thank you for joining tonight, everyone. This is the first in a series of remote meetings about how you can get involved in NYC Mesh as an installer and helping to develop our network infrastructure. I'll start just with a couple of housekeeping items. I've automatically muted everyone when you joined. Please try to keep yourself muted during the presentation. Because there isn't a ton of people, feel free to unmute your microphone if you have a burning question. I'm happy to stop and answer those as we go along. Or you can save your questions for the end and we'll have a Q&A period. Or if you like, you can post them to the group chat and we can take a look at them and address them at the Q&A at the end as well. So once again, welcome. I'm so glad that all of you have joined. It's a bit strange speaking just at my computer screen. I've done this before in front of a room of people to not have the kind of reaction, but I guess we're all adapting to these new forms of communication at this time. So thank you for bearing with me as I adapt. Just a little bit about me to start, and then I'll talk about NYC Mesh a little bit and about what I'm going to talk about tonight. My name is Willem. I'm an install leader at NYC Mesh. I've been involved for about a year and a half now. When I joined, I didn't have any technical experience at all. My day job is in architecture and sound design. Really the only thing in common with the kind of work that I do now at Mesh is that I'm on rooftops a fair amount for my day job as well. But I was really attracted to Mesh because I was looking to get involved in a community organization to give back to the neighborhood that I really love living in, Chinatown, Lower East Side, Manhattan. And also to join an organization that was, I thought, proposing a really new way of providing an essential service to the people of New York in a way that is not controlled by corporations. So there's a very exciting kind of political prospect as well when I joined. And so today I'm an install leader and I also do some work developing community-wide installs, block-wide installs. And I'm going to be presenting today with Chris Gutierrez, who's also an install leader and who will tell you a little bit more about himself later in the presentation, and who is also going to be delivering the next in the series next Tuesday. So now just a little bit about NYC Mesh. NYC Mesh was founded in 2012 by a bunch of neighbors who realized that they could share their intranet with each other. I think the first connection was actually from Brian Hall's apartment to a bar that was kind of in the street below, which is where the first meetups were held. Since then, we've grown to over 500 nodes. Those are locations where we have an antenna or a router set up. And I think we probably serve over 1,500 New Yorkers every day who rely on us for their intranet. And we're expanding incredibly fast. Unfortunately, we've had to put installs on hold at the moment because of coronavirus. But when we get back up into business again, the pace of growth is going to be really fast. And I really look forward to seeing you all join us on installs when that happens. Along with our geographic growth, we've also grown in our social growth as well. We've been able to provide service to low-income neighborhoods, to NYCHA buildings, and we've also partnered with and shared our expertise with other small fledgling networks in the United States and around the world as well, spreading our technical knowledge and also our organizational knowledge of how to get other community networks off the ground. So what I'm going to be talking about tonight is the typical volunteer-led install process that we do. This is how we get the majority of people connected onto NYC Mesh. I'm not going to cover the really big hub node installs tonight. I'm just going to focus on the typical kind of install that you might join as a volunteer installer the first time you go on an install. And there are lots of ways to get involved in Mesh, but I think starting off as a volunteer installer is one of the best ways. You really get to know people in the community. You get your hands dirty, and you are going to be on the front lines of expanding and maintaining our network. So what I'm going to present tonight is a pretty comprehensive overview of the whole process of a volunteer-led install. It's a lot of information, so it's okay if you only remember a few things from it, because really most of the learning that we do is on the job, on rooftops all over New York. I will also present, or I will post the presentation to our docs website afterwards, so you can use it as a reference and to remind yourself as well before going on an install. So I'd like to start with the question of who should become an installer. What do we look for in installers? You know, how should you decide if this is right for you? Really, the only way to know that is to come and join us on an install, but there are a few skills that we look for, or skills that we think are great to develop if you want to develop those skills further. The first one is technical knowledge, which is good to have if you know something about networking technology. That's always a plus. However, I don't think it's the most important thing to know, and the hurdle of learning the technical skills is not actually that high for a typical install. So if you have no experience, it's no problem. Some of the other really important things, though, are to be able to problem solve on the go, on the fly, on rooftops, when it's cold, when it's a bit drizzly out, working independently as well as working with others. Most of the installs we do are in groups, so both teamwork and being able to manage your own task are important. And then time management, and also curiosity as well, just being interested in learning new ways of installing and new ways of extending our network into different communities. And finally, we did a poll of all of our install leaders a couple of years ago, asking what do you think are the most important qualities for an install leader to have? And number one above all else was patience. So if you are a patient person, or you want to become more patient, becoming an installer is a great way to do that. What are the benefits to becoming an installer? Why go out and hang out on rooftops and do this? The first one is to pick up new skills, both the technical skills involved in setting up new nodes, and also soft skills as well, teamwork, leadership, community building, stuff like that. To me, this is one of the big motivating factors, just the camaraderie, meeting people in our network and our community, and helping connect new people to the mesh, and working with other people who are also motivated to learn from all sorts of different backgrounds. Also, just the excitement of expanding the network. This is a map of our current network. A year ago when I gave this presentation, it was about half the size of this. And one of the great pleasures I have when I finish the install is seeing that node go live on the map. That always really makes me happy. Of course, it's always nice to get outside, and you can enjoy some pretty nice views. This is our installer Esther at our new Grand Street hub. I've never been up this high. This view is pretty phenomenal. One day I'll get there, I think. And then finally, again, in the survey we did of install leaders, one of the top motivators for why people go out and do this is just seeing the joy on a new member's face when they get connected. And I think you can really see it in these photos. These people are super happy to not have to use Spectrum anymore, or Verizon, and to be connected to our community. So I'm going to start by just talking about who is part of an install team. And these roles aren't always exactly clear-cut. Some of them can overlap a little bit, but this is just an overall description of the responsibilities of different people on an install. The first person is what you might call a ticket agent. That's the person who answers initial questions from the installing member, will check if there's a viable line of sight from their apartment building, and kind of decide if the install should go ahead or not. And if so, we'll send a link to the installee member to schedule an install. The second role is the install leader. This person picks up the install ticket from there. And we'll also coordinate the team, we'll communicate with the installee member, and on the site we'll assemble equipment, we'll assemble equipment beforehand and then on site delegate and teach tasks. We'll also just be responsible for maintaining a positive, respectful, and inclusive attitude, watch out for safety, and also gets paid a small fee to cover expenses, and then does a bit of wrap up after that as well. Then typically on a standard residential install, there are 1 to 3 additional trainee installers with different levels of experience. This is the kind of role that any of you on the call would be filling for the first time when you go out to install. And your role here is really just to show up, to participate, to be proactive, to take on new tasks, to learn, and to kind of make your way to becoming an install leader yourself. And then there's the installee member. This is a person who's getting installed. Their job is to be at home during the entire install, to make sure that conditions are safe, and also to participate if they want. And we do always encourage installee members to participate, to get them more invested in the network, and hopefully to convert them into becoming volunteer installers themselves. And then finally, we really benefit from having some remote technical support. Some of our most experienced members are usually online to help troubleshoot. This is a really essential role as well. So how do you get started if you want to get on an install? Now, of course, this is not a great time to get out on rooftops, and in fact, we've temporarily suspended our installs because of coronavirus. But when we are back up and running, the way you can do that is by requesting to join the install team channel. And I take that back. You can join the install team channel on Slack now. I actually encourage you to do that after this video conference. Slack, for those of you who are unfamiliar with it, is the kind of message board, the sort of Facebook equivalent for our community. And we have one dedicated channel, which is locked, so you need to ask for permission to join it, which is where we plan all of our installs. So all you have to do is join Slack, just send a message saying, hey, I would love to go and install. Can you please add me to the install team channel? And someone will add you. Another thing that you should do before going on your first install is just read the site safety and etiquette guidelines on our docs page. I'll keep mentioning safety things over the course of this presentation, but it's incredibly important because we are working in a dangerous space on rooftops to just review all of our kind of safety information before you go out for the first time. So take a look at those docs. Again, they're linked through this document. You can check it out after the presentation on the website. So generally speaking, on a typical install, we can kind of divide it up into 4 phases. The first phase is sign up. That's when the installee member first states their interest in joining the network. Then a pre-install phase, then the install itself, and then a post-install phase. So I'll go through each of these phases the rest of the presentation. So starting with sign up, prior to the whole kind of net neutrality thing that was going through Congress a few years ago, it was a much more informal way. People would get connected to the network. They would send an email. They might come to a meetup in person. And then there was a massive explosion of interest in NYC Mesh, and a few of our members worked incredibly hard to automate that process. So the result of that is that now the kind of first point of contact with someone who's interested in joining is what we call the form, which you access through the website by clicking on Get Connected. And so all installs begin with the prospective installee member filling this out. As soon as they've filled out this form, the response is saved on a spreadsheet and they appear on our map as a potential node. Immediately after that, a kind of canned email is sent back to them requesting a panorama photo from their rooftop. I have window here. I should probably strike that out because we've stopped doing window installs. So it's really just, you have rooftop access, the next step is for that installee member to take a photo. That message is logged in our ticketing system, which is called OS Ticket. And it will kind of disappear until an installee member replies with their Pano photo. This helps us deal with the sometimes very large volume of requests that come in. So really someone has to take some additional action before their ticket gets opened. So this is the step typically done by a ticket agent, someone who's on OS Ticket. The line of sight is checked by that person to see if there is a viable connection. Now, the way that we connect people to the mesh is by providing a rooftop antenna/router that needs a clear line of sight to another rooftop antenna. So it's absolutely essential that we check to make sure that there is that clear line of sight before deciding to proceed with the install. There are a number of ways to check line of sight, and I'll go through a few of those. The first one is just on the panorama photo itself. This is the easiest way. If the supernode or the hub node is visible, you can just say, all right, it's a go, let's plan this install. So here's an example of two Pano photos that just show very clearly supernode 3 in Industry City. But it's not always so easy to see the hub node from the panorama photo, so there are a few other ways as well. One of the ways is to start just by looking at our NYC Mesh map to see what nodes are nearby. And not all nodes can be connected to. The node either needs to have sector antennas, which I'll maybe talk about a little bit later, or an omnidirectional antenna. So you need to kind of check on the map to see which nodes are kind of just endpoints and which points kind of rebroadcast a signal that you can connect to. There's another tool we have on our website called the Line of Sight app. This tool actually allows you to type in the address of the node, and it will identify feasible lines of sight to nearby hub nodes as well. So you can use that as well. It was developed by Oliver, who also develops our website. Some really incredible work that he's done here. Another thing you can do, and I do this pretty often, is just go into Google Maps and go into 3D mode and zoom down to the rooftop and try to identify if there's a clear line of sight that way. Additionally, we have a .kml file that you can load into Google Earth that shows all of our current nodes and connections. And Google Earth will also allow you to draw a line between two nodes and offset the height and actually drop a kind of shadow to see if it's intersecting anything along the way. So these are some of the things that a ticket agent will do
Hey, Chris, I think you might be muted.
Hey, everyone.
Okay, you're back.
Connected there for a sec. I'm back. I'm gonna share my screen again. Chris, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. I was
okay. Thanks
all
for
right.
your patience, everyone. And go into present mode. Present. Okay. All right. Thanks for waiting, everyone. So I'm not sure exactly where I lost you, but at this point, what's happened is the installee member has scheduled their install. Let's see. Let's go to the chat. Yep. The installee member has scheduled their install, and immediately an install ticket shows up in our Slack install team channel that is visible to everyone in that channel. So at that point, the install leader can claim the install and can invite additional installers to state their interest in joining. So it's always polite, I think, as a first-time installer to just not say, hey, I'm coming, but to say, hey, I'm really interested in joining this install. Can I come? I say that because we want to limit the number of people on rooftops. Obviously, it's not good if we have like 5 people on a rooftop at once. It's not safe, and there won't be enough work for everyone to do. So just be polite, say, hey, I'm interested in joining, and the install leader, once they've claimed the install, will confirm that you can attend. Typically, installs aren't really oversubscribed, so there's a very good chance that you'll be able to join. And if for some reason that install is full, you should be able to join another upcoming install. So the next step for the install leader, and sometimes this is delegated to other installers or trainees as well, is to assemble the equipment that's required to carry out the install. And you can see a variety of our equipment spread out over this rooftop. That's Scott and Marie. We have a list of typical equipment we use on installs on the docs, and there's also a handy Google Doc checklist that I use to plan out my installs on that same page. NYC Mesh, the organization, will order and ship networking and mounting equipment to install leaders and some additional equipment. I did mention that install labor fee that goes to the install leader earlier. That money typically, along with transportation, goes to purchasing new equipment as well. So I've found as an install leader that I basically break even the whole enterprise when all is said and done. So that install leader fee is there to help offset the cost of incidental equipment that's needed. So I'm not going to go through all of the equipment that we use. I'm going to go through it kind of selectively, but I invite you to check out the equipment docs page to kind of look in more detail at the typical equipment that we use. So the next step for an install leader is to determine which routers are needed to connect to a nearby node. The routers I'm showing on this page are the 3 most common routers that we use. And just a note on when I say router, I say it kind of interchangeably with antenna. Really what these things are is they're a router and an antenna all in one. So I may switch back and forth between saying one and the other. So there are 2 types of these antennas, broadly speaking. One is a point to multi-point antenna. This is a kind of endpoint antenna. It doesn't rebroadcast any signal. And then we also have an omnidirectional antenna, this OmniTIC device, which both receives and then broadcasts a signal out from there that other nodes can connect to. We have additional antennas that we use on larger hubs, but these are the 3 that you'll encounter the most often on your installs. And another note is that they're made by 2 manufacturers that use 2 different protocols for the signal. So the MikroTik devices just use a standard Wi-Fi signal, whereas the Ubiquiti devices have their own proprietary signal that, that they use. We very often, and this is the most common install setup of all at the moment, we often install a light beam and an OmniTIC together in one place. You can see those two in this install. And this ensures that we have a strong connection to a hub node, which is through the light beam, which has a very kind of focused, narrow beam, and also provide omnidirectional coverage to the surrounding blocks, which is what that OmniTick does. It has a kind of more of a pancake-shaped beam, which is not as focused and strong in one direction, but allows you to connect to it from rooftops from the whole surrounding block area. Another advantage to adding that OmniTick to a light beam is that it has 5 ports in it, whereas the light beam only has 1, which means that we can connect multiple apartments to it. If it's just the Omni on itself, we can connect up to 5 apartments. If it has the light beam, up to 4, because that light beam hooks into one of those ports. Sometimes we also add this MikroTik SXT device to the OmniTick. What that allows us to do is boost the signal from when we're connecting to another OmniTick. You know, in certain neighborhoods where we get a sufficient density, we start to just install these OmniTicks, and they all kind of connect to each other. And then through 1 or 2 local hubs, they will connect back to a supernode. So as we start to get a little bit further than 1 or 2 blocks away, it becomes a weaker and weaker signal to the OmniTick. So we'll add that SXT on top, which has a directional beam, and we'll get a stronger signal, and we'll pass it through that OmniTick to the installing member's apartment. So once the install leader has decided what devices to install, then there's a configuration process that usually goes on at home the night before the install. Sometimes when I'm training new installers, especially if they've been on a few installs before, I will meet up for coffee before the install, and we'll do those configurations before the install. And a big shout out to Zach Giles, who's going to be doing the 3rd in the series, for making the configuration process so much easier. We have a website called configin.nycmesh.net that basically just allows you to download a configuration file and pretty easily upload it. And I believe in part 2 of the series, Chris will be going through the actual configuration process. I'm not going to be doing that tonight. Another thing that we do occasionally is we hold these things called configuration parties. That's kind of going to be like what Chris is going to show you or set up next week. But when we can, and I get so nostalgic seeing this at the moment, we all get together and learn in one physical space. One thing that I like to do as an install leader is make a plan every time I go out on an install, just a Google Doc that has some of the key information. This helps me prepare for what I'm going to encounter on the site, stay organized while I'm there, and also remind me of the nodes I'm trying to connect to. Also, it's nice to just have a handy reference for the installee member's name, address, and phone number in case I forget it, which I sometimes do. I can just look at it on my phone and remember it. So typically that install plan includes details of the installee member and the other installers, some Google Earth screenshots so I can orient myself when I get on the roof, like the one you see here. It can be a bit disorienting sometimes when you're up there, so it always helps to kind of call out some local landmarks, like you see this armory here in Bed-Stuy. Then if it's a kind of multi-apartment install, or I'm going to 2 installs, I might make a kind of schedule for myself. I'll also make an equipment checklist and tick things off as I add them to my bag. And then I don't add this anymore because I finally memorized it, but the Ethernet cable order is always good to keep in there as well until you memorize the order of the cables that you have to set up to crimp that cable. And again, Chris is going to talk more about this in a bit. Another thing I've started doing recently is just anticipating mounting options. This is one example of that. I use the very sophisticated technique of Microsoft Paint to make these little diagrams. And they're incredibly useful because it helps you plan out what kind of mounting you're going to do on the roof. And you can see in this example that we did in fact use one of those options mounting to the side of the chimney. So it was really helpful to kind of look at this in advance. Super important thing as an install leader, it's important to check the weather a few days before the install. You know, if you see that there are a few days of rain coming up, it's good practice to be courteous and get in touch with the installee member and cancel or reschedule it. Continue to check the weather in the days before the install. So next task is getting to site. A few of us have cars and can kind of tote around our equipment that way. I like to use the subway, and I just have a little dolly cart and strap all of my gear to that and kind of figure out which subway stations have elevators in them. If anyone wants to buy me a birthday present next year, I would really love a stair climbing hand truck. This is really my dream to own one of these bad boys that will just walk right up a staircase. So that's, you know, once we get back into action, that's my dream, to have one of these. So that's basically everything that needs to go on before the actual install. So now let's talk about what happens when you get to site. So I'll start just with a typical diagram of what a setup looks like on an average residential install. So starting kind of at the top outside, we have that OmniTick omnidirectional router connected to our actually multi-point router, that's our light beam. Then we have number 3, a mount of some sort, and then Cat5e or Cat6 Ethernet cable that goes down to the apartment, typically down the back of the building if we can, to avoid clutter on the front of the building. And then we pass that cable in the apartment. There are a few ways that we do that, and we'll talk about that in a bit. Then that cable goes to a power over Ethernet injector, which plugs into the wall or into a power strip. I should really update this diagram to show that. A surge protector is really important. And then that power over Ethernet injector, which is supplying power up to those routers, is also transmitting data to and from an indoor router, the little thing with the rabbit ears. And that's what the installee member will connect their devices to. So this is how it typically looks. Sometimes it's a little bit different than that. Sometimes you bring the cable down to chase, you know, sometimes the installee member will want to set up a home Wi-Fi system, and there'll be some repeaters. But this gives you a pretty good sense of what most installs look like. So the first thing you do is all of the members of the install team will get together, introduce yourself to each other, and meet the installee member. And say hi, introduce yourself, talk a little bit about what the install is going to entail, and then start with an indoor survey. So you go into their apartment, you ask where they want to locate their indoor router, and you also ask what cable pass methods are acceptable to them. Don't just take your drill and start going through the wall. You're also going to want to discuss possible cable runs down to the apartment. Very often, well, not very often, but pretty often, there are some restrictions on where cables can go. And it's really important, point of courtesy, to make sure that you understand where cables can run along the building and where they can't. The landlord or the building owner may have some restrictions there. So after you've started inside, then you proceed up to the rooftop. And if you're lucky, there will be a staircase or an elevator. If you're not so lucky, there may be a hatch with a ladder. Always make sure in that case that the ladder is safe and secure before you go up. And when you get to the rooftop, just ask the installee member to point out any hazards, do a little walk around the roof to make sure it's safe, and stay off the parapet and edge. There's more guidance on how to stay safe on rooftops on the site safety doc. So do take a look at that. And a really important thing to keep reminding yourself is if conditions are too unsafe or become unsafe because night falls or the weather changes, it starts to rain or snow, you know, it can be really, really painful to have to end the install. It really sucks. It's unfortunate. Everyone's come out, everyone's excited about it, but do end the install and reschedule it. Safety is really important. It's number one. So that's super important. So if all the conditions are safe and clear, then the next thing to do is a survey. So the first part of the survey is to identify the node you want to connect to. Sometimes you can see it, as in this case, this is actually my rooftop, and I could see the nearby hub node I was trying to connect to. That's not always the case, so that's again where it helps to have that install plan with just some connections to nearby hubs on it to orient yourself. Which I mentioned before, and you can see here. I also recently bought a little monocular, which is like a single binocular that helps you kind of magnify your view a little bit. And as you're looking for the hub that you're trying to connect to, you should also be thinking about where you're going to mount the router on the rooftop. And if you have multiple routers, you're going to want to figure out where to put them in relation to each other. Sometimes they're on the same pole. Sometimes it makes more sense to get the strongest signal with your point to multi-point router in one place and broadcast to the surrounding community and neighborhood from another place. So, you know, have a think about that as well. You're also going to want to look at if there may be something existing that you can mount to, or whether you're going to need to provide a new mount. And Chris who's going to be talking in just a bit, is truly the master of identifying abandoned poles, conduit, and reusing it. I'm continually in awe of how resourceful he is when he goes and installs and finds stuff that we can reuse. Another few things to think about is that router going to be in anyone's way in the future? Will that cabling be in anyone's way? You kind of have to assume that people will occasionally be up on the roof, especially if there's like a roof deck or evidence that people do use that roof. Just assume that people will bump into something, they'll knock something, they'll trip over something, and plan your locations accordingly. That said, you also want to make sure that the locations are accessible enough for the routers that people can come back to maintain them without having to necessarily add a ladder. So think about that as well too. So once you've identified a good location to mount the router and you've found your line of sight to a node, the next thing to do is test the signal. So this is typically done with an external battery pack. Because all of these devices work over power over Ethernet, we provide power from a little battery, and then the power goes from that battery to the power over Ethernet injector and then into the router. And we can either use a computer or our phone or an app on the phone to find whether we can get a connection or not. So here's what that looks like in practice. I won't go through the details of this. You'll learn it when you go and install. Just know that the most important thing is to not start cabling down to the apartment and drilling through their wall and connecting the power inside until you've done this outdoor survey with a battery to confirm that you have connection. So I'm just going to kind of breeze through this section here. You'll learn all of this on site. There's a slightly different method for pairing the OmniTick router. You can read more about that later. And I already mentioned this important point. Don't drill until you know you've confirmed you're able to connect. So the next task is, once you've confirmed that, congratulations, that's always very exciting, is to mount the routers. And there are a few ways to do this. The one I already mentioned is to find an existing thing to mount it to. There are all sorts of vertical poles and pipes on rooftops. The one you see over to the top right is a kind of some sort of air pressure tube that you see on all sorts of roofs for the plumbing. It doesn't get hot. You can very easily mount to that and nothing bad's going to happen to it. And then you can kind of improvise as well, you know, in this case, just mounting it to the vertical of a chain link fence. It's Tariq that install. One important note is to not obstruct a fire escape or other means of egress. That's illegal. You are not supposed to do that under New York City code. We also typically tote around these things called J-pipes. They're pretty inexpensive pieces of equipment. They're made by the same manufacturer as the light beam. And you can use this to mount onto a horizontal, onto a vertical surface. And it just kind of pops that router up above a parapet or a chimney. Again, I won't go through the details of how you mount this. Really, the most important thing is that you don't attach one of these onto the surface of the roof. Otherwise, water will get in, and that will be a disaster. So if you need to mount it to a horizontal surface, make sure that it's to something that is not the roof waterproofing membrane itself, but do it to a parapet, do it to something that is concrete or brick, and make sure that you seal the holes that you're drilling into with some sealant. Occasionally, we also strap a pipe onto an existing piece of equipment as well. The one you see at the left is actually a rooftop solar panel. We increasingly see these on rooftops. I think this one is from a company called Brooklyn Solar, and they can be a bit difficult to mount to, so that's why we added the additional pipe on there as well. And then occasionally we have a bit more bespoke mounting options. Sometimes, especially on newer buildings, there isn't much to attach to on the rooftop. So one method for putting up new routers is to actually make a little mast and weigh it down with cinder blocks. This, of course, takes a bit more coordination. Another method that we have is to, I'm not even sure what these things are called. They're little kind of unistrut channels or something like that you can mount to. This for a while was the hub that was supplying all of Brooklyn with internet. And I think for a while it may have not had these guy wires. It was pretty tenuous, and recently a bunch of people went back and added some guy wires to it to stabilize it as well. So there are lots of different methods. These are some of the more bespoke and coordination heavy methods. And then, of course, you can improvise as well. This is our infamous tree node that I think may have actually been recently upgraded to a non-tree node. But, we are a scrappy community organization. We improvise at NYC Mesh. One important note is to not mount the router upside down. It may sound obvious, but sometimes you forget. If you do, water will drain into the Ethernet port, and that will not be good. Typically, we carry around a few different drill bits. We, use a carbide tip for masonry and concrete, and a cobalt or titanium tip bit for metal and wood. Most install leaders have their own cordless hammer drill. It is important that if you do want to buy your own drill for going on mesh installs, that it is a hammer drill. Otherwise, you're not going to make it through brick or concrete. If you haven't drilled before, it's really good to make sure that you train with an install leader to be able to stay safe and use the right technique. There are a few tips and tricks that I won't go through now, but that you can read in this presentation. When I was starting out as an install leader, I just went on YouTube and, searched tips for drilling into brick as well. And there are lots of handy tricks for expediting the process as well. I already mentioned the thing about water. If you are doing it into a horizontal surface that's a brick or concrete parapet, make sure that you fill that hole with sealant. So once you've mounted the router onto the mast or whatever else you're putting it on, if it's in that omnitic, omnidirectional router, you don't need to align it. It doesn't really matter where the signal is coming from. If you are mounting a point-to-multipoint router, you do need to align it to get the best possible signal. In the Ubiquiti, they're the manufacturer of the Lightbeam product. For Ubiquiti, they have a handy little alignment app that actually plays a little sine tone, and the higher the sine tone goes, the better you have it aligned. So if that basically allows you to move your dish around very slowly, and then as it gets higher, the better it is, and that will help a lot. For the SXT, to my knowledge, there is no alignment tool. You just have to aim that thing as best you can towards the nearest OmniTick. So on a typical install where we install both an OmniTick and a Lightbeam, you need to connect the two. You'll need to do that with a length of outdoor rated Ethernet cable. Chris is going to talk about how you treat those lengths of cable to be able to plug them into the device just a bit. Just one important note here is to not use indoor Ethernet cable. It's really important that it's outdoor rated. So then once you've mounted the routers, you've connected them together if there are multiple routers, then you pull out the entire length of cable you need along the exact path, and emphasis on exact, that it will follow down to the apartment, and add extra length for service loops in case someone needs to go back and modify something. And oh my gosh, I have been so thankful that people have provided service loops on installs when I've gone out to fix things up. Because if you don't provide one and you need to fix something and the length of the cable is too short, you need to run an entire new cable down to the apartment, unless you're able to connect the two and put it in some sort of box that's waterproof outside. You don't want to do that. I also emphasize exact because sometimes you can get, or sometimes I get a little bit lazy and just kind of spool the cable out and let it go down, and then I realize I'm just coming to the end of my cable and have room for just one service loop at the end. So really make sure that you're following the exact contours of the edge of the rooftop when you are bringing the cable down. You're also just going to want to make sure that you don't bend that cable too sharply. Maintain at least a 3-inch curve radius, preferably more. I like to maintain about a 6-inch radius whenever I'm running that cable anywhere. After you've laid that cable out and you've lowered it down to the apartment, then just use zip ties to tie it off securely to wherever you're running it along. If it's a railing, typically we try and run the cable along existing lengths of cable. There's all sorts of cabling that goes across a typical New York City rooftop, so we'll just try and minimize the clutter on the rooftop as much as possible. Okay, so the next task is to get the cable into the apartment. And there are a few ways we do this. The most or the least invasive way is to go through an existing cable pass or conduit. So occasionally you'll see something like a defunct telephone box or something in the wall, or just some basically hole that's been provided in the wall for network connections. You just unscrew the faceplate and pull the cable through, reattach it. Very often too, there will be some sort of defunct cable that's going through a hole in the wall. It tends to be a coaxial cable, which is used for cable internet. So, you know, you can just take a look around the window area and see what's coming into the apartment. Ask the installee member if they're using a cable, if it's kind of just hanging there. And what you can do then is there's a technique for actually trimming that cable and using it to tow in your Ethernet cable. So you just kind of snip that coax cable on the outside of the window, you strip everything away till it's just copper, and you wrap it around the end of your Ethernet cable, and you just pull it right in through the wall. Big shout out to Jason Howard, one of our senior install leaders, for teaching me that wonderful technique. Also pretty common is to just go through a corner of the window frame This, it's a little bit more invasive, but it's just a 1/4-inch hole. And you just want to make sure that you drill that as low down as possible to the windowsill, so that when you close the window, it doesn't press down on that cable. Typically, when we do this, we also provide a strip of weather seal as well, so you can land the mosquito net on it. So in the summer, people don't have bugs flying into their apartment when you land that net on the cable. One additional method for doing this is to just drill all the way through the wall with a very long drill bit, in case they don't want to go through the windowsill, or it's not possible to go through that windowsill. There are a few other methods we improvise as well, but these are kind of the common ones. So I'm now going to hand it over to Chris for a few slides to talk about how we treat the ends of the cable and some stuff as well. So Chris, I'm just going to unmute you and take it away.
Hello, everyone. My name is Christian Gutierrez. I'm hearing a little bit of echo. Oh, it's gone. Good. I'll be showing you sort of like an intro to what I'm going to be doing in 2 weeks. It's been postponed to April 7th, but we'll update the meetup schedule very soon. Yeah, Willem asked me to also introduce myself and how I joined the Mesh. So I joined in July, right after one of Willem's presentations, which was this presentation last year in Pilot Fiverr downtown. It was, like you saw, very informative, and it allowed me to get a broad idea of what the Mesh was about and how to really go in and get my hands dirty installing. I work in IT, and I was always looking for a way to volunteer my skills, and this was a perfect match. And I've been volunteering since July, so it's about 7 months. And it's a great experience. You make a lot of friends, and you learn a lot about, from other install leaders, from other volunteers, and from the members as well. And I'm always happy to bring NYC Mesh to a member that's tired of Spectrum and the regular ISPs. So moving forward, I think, so Willem, I'll have you change the slides. For now, what we're looking at is an external RJ45. These are different from the regular plastic ones that we use in indoors. You can go ahead and move to the next slide. Okay, so this is the topology that we use, and with 568B, this is the standard that we use in the Mesh, and it just allows us to reduce troubleshooting if we keep the same. You can learn this pinout and just memorize it. It'll be very useful to whenever you have to do crimps. This is the bread and butter of the installs. One bad crimp and you have to go back and troubleshoot, or the router is not getting internet. A lot of problems. So it's very important that we do this properly and use this as standard. I'm not going to go over how to actually make them, but we'll do that in a couple of weeks, and we'll do a step-by-step and what to do, what not to do, and so on. Go ahead and, all right, this is what we use for testing. I have one right here. So this is the crimping kit that the Mesh gives you. After 3 installs, you get one of these in the mail, and it includes the crimping tool, which is where you're going to be using to do the crimps on site, and also the tester this tester is not the best, but it's useful. And it's going to tell you whether you did a good crimp or not. If one of those lights doesn't show, it means that you have to redo your crimp. And we're working on tough cable, which is it's an outdoor graded tough cable. This is much harder to do than the indoor cable, and as the colder it gets, the harder it gets to work with. Go ahead, you can go on to the next one. No, okay, we're looking at the indoor router setup. That's the router we use for now. I have one here as well. This is included in the installer's fee, and Willem is going to be talking more about it very soon. But this is what we give our members. It's just a basic indoor router. We set it up. We generally just leave the default, but we recommend to set it up with the mesh Wi-Fi. And sometimes we ask the installee members if they want a specific Wi-Fi name and password. So we'll also go over how to change these in the training coming. Let's go to the next one. Okay, this is part of how we set up the indoor routing, the indoor router. This is, we have a PO injector like this one. This is what powers our devices. Well, not this one specifically, but it's something like this. It's 24 volts. This is what powers our devices in the rooftop. And then the data goes back to our one port here, the blue one. And that's and then we just propagate the signal in the apartment. Let's go to the next one. We started using couplers. Yeah. So we started using these. These are the couplers that you also see the black one on the screen. This is just to prevent the installing members from plugging in the power supply for the PoE devices on the rooftop directly to the indoor router, because like this one right here is actually burned. They plugged it in by mistake, and we couldn't return it because it was outside the return window. Let's go to the next. Yeah, and that's just the recommendation I just made. I'm not sure how, hold on. Okay, yeah, so go back to the speed test. So at the end of our installs, we ask the installing member to go to speedtest.net and test what kind of speeds they have. If it's too low, and I'll say from experience that will be anything below 10 up and down, then I'll try to troubleshoot and see how we can get a better speed. But we regularly get from the fastest I've seen is roughly 120 download, and the slowest, like I said, if it's under 10, I generally go and troubleshoot, but I don't leave the installing members' residence without it being over 10. And that's, I think that's a good rule of thumb. Let's go to the next. Oh, this is, yeah, this is one of, I think, Willem, you made this, but this is, we leave this with the installing member.
No, that was Olivier, actually.
Oh, that was Olivier? Okay.
Yeah, credit where it's due.
Okay. This, when we have it, we recommend to print some and bring it with us. We'll leave this with the installing member. We get a lot of support requests asking us what is the username or what is the password, what is the Wi-Fi password of members that either don't remember it or they have reset the router and they don't know it. So it's best to leave these behind so they have quick access to them. And one more. All right, so troubleshooting. Yeah, one of the things, again, after testing the speeds is troubleshooting. Sometimes you don't get internet at all. Sometimes it's a bad crimp. Whatever it is, there is always support. And the easiest way to do that is to go to our Slack channel, and that's the install team Slack channel. Is also, we also have a support channel, or we have a few members that are available that you can message directly, and they're pretty quick about getting back to you and tell you and help you what is it, how you can improve it. We are, like I said, we're there. It's, if one of us is not available, another experienced installing member, leader is going to be available, and they're going to help you. And yeah, go next. Okay, so, and this is, so tune in for April 7th at 7 p.m. is the same time. And we're gonna go very in depth into how to do a crimp, into how to properly do a crimp, how not to pinch your thumb with this copper wire right here, because it does go a lot of times under your nail and it hurts. So we're gonna go over that. We're gonna go over how to configure the both antennas on the rooftop. That's going to be the OmniTick, which is the omnidirectional antenna, and the light beam, which is this antenna behind me. Sorry, yeah, that's the light beam. And I think that's me. I don't know, Willem, if you want me to add anything else.
Oh, that's great. I'm very envious of all of your props too, Chris.
I had it in the other room. I brought them in to sort of have a better background.
Okay, so you should all put that in your calendars. I'm going to attend. I'm super excited for that workshop, and I just have a few more steps to share with you before we go to questions. So once everything is set up, once you've done the speed test, once the installee member has expressed their joy at joining NYC Mesh and being able to jettison Verizon. Well, yeah, I shouldn't say that exactly. We, typically I won't tell them to get rid of whatever commercial ISP they have right away. I very often will just say, hey, compare the two for a month, don't throw everything out right away. But anyway, once we've connected them, we're happy with the speed. Then the install leader will direct them to pay the hardware fee, and if they're able to afford it, and if they'd like to contribute it, a monthly donation as well. Currently, we have two hardware fees, a kind of full fee and a subsidized fee. We used to have just one fee, which was the lower 110 plus $50 fee for labor. But then when we started to install these omnidirectional routers along with the light beams, that increased our install cost quite a bit. We didn't want to just pass that on to everyone who signed up, knowing that that would make the install a lot less affordable, and remaining affordable is super important to us. So now we just give people the option. There's no test. We don't make them demonstrate that they need the subsidized option. We just say, if you want to pay the subsidized option, you're welcome to do that. If you can't afford it and would like to, you can pay the full amount as well. As we also request, if people can afford it, to give a recurring monthly donation as well. We really rely on those monthly donations to maintain and expand the network. With the hardware fee, we're really just covering our installation costs. And then finally, I briefly mentioned it, there is a labor fee that goes to the install leader, and the installing member pays the install leader directly in cash, Venmo, PayPal, or whatever works. Then, ideally, you will have been doing this throughout the install while not getting too distracted from installing everything, but continue to take some photos after the install. of the install team, of the equipment, of the happy installee member, if they permit you to take a photo with them. You know, this is super, super important. It's how we document our installs. It's how we share our message. We post these photos to Twitter. And it really, you know, when I look back at all the photos that I've taken and of the teams I've been on over the past year and a half, it's really just great to see all the work we've done. And especially at a time like this where I'm cooped up, I'm feeling a bit nostalgic. I'll go back and look through those and remember how great it is to be out there on the rooftops. It's also important to clean up. We like to think of ourselves as going above and beyond our competitors, if you could call it that, for the commercial ISP world. So make sure that you clean up as you go, that you tidy any mess that you make, that you clean up the ends of the cable that you snip off. I like to just use a $1 paintbrush to sweep up everything. You know, tidy as you go as well as at the end. This also helps to prevent you from leaving a piece of equipment on site. It's a real pain to have to go back to pick up something you've forgotten. If you still have time, if you have energy and enthusiasm after the install, it's great to drop off some flyers, both in the building saying, hey, the mesh is in your building, connect with us, or around the block as well. And we provide these flyers both at meetups. We normally bring a stack of them, and you can also find them on our docs website and print out some of your own. It does work. I have seen a number of tickets come in a few days after going around and dropping off these brochures. It's also just a great way to take a walk around the neighborhood and have a conversation with other people about what the mesh is. You just invariably run into people and they ask what you're doing, and it's nice to get some face-to-face time in the community sharing what we do. Then after you've wrapped up the install, there are a few additional tasks that are good to do as a matter of best practice. In the install team thread where you were planning the install, post the speed test, post some technical photos showing the setup, and just mention who actually came on the install. And then in the install channel, which is public, and anyone can see it, they don't have to have signed up to join that channel. I like to post photos of the happy new install members. I find that's really motivating to me to see other people's installs and the happy people that they've installed with and for. And also, as an install leader, I like to post a thank you message to the entire install team and to anyone who is providing remote support as well. I think it's also just really important for motivating everyone and showing our enthusiasm for all of the installs that take place. All install leaders kind of sign up for an inventory app as well. This is called Canvas Apps. This is where we keep track of what we have in stock at each of our apartments or workplaces. It's also a good place to look. If you're missing a piece of equipment before an install, you can come here and see who has it and who you can borrow something from. Then we also, this is being kind of upgraded, and it's a work in progress, but currently we have a master Google Docs spreadsheet where we record all the installs. This is what also controls our map online, so you can go into that master spreadsheet and change the status of the node to install, put the date in, and also reference what it's connecting to. And a few minutes later, it'll pop up on the map. Then another thing that's good to do is we have this very long Google Doc, which we call our post-mortem document. And this provides you the opportunity to note down what went wrong, what went right, what could have helped you on the install, and a few other things. It's really instructive to read through this document as a new installer, just to see all the things that you might not have thought about before going on the install that other people have encountered. It's quite entertaining bedtime reading for sure. It's really helped me just reading through all the problems that other people have had to avoid some of those problems on site, or to think about how to fix them and troubleshoot when they do happen. I recently just took a look at the entire post-mortem document and kind of called out the top 10 what went wrongs and what went rights. Among those are people arriving late. It's really courteous for everyone to show up on time, especially during the winter. We're kind of coming out of that season now, but when the day is shorter, you want to make sure that you get that install done while it's still light out. Also, just that the install took a long time. Sometimes that's inevitable. You can't do much about it. That there was missing equipment, that the equipment was faulty, which happens occasionally. It's frustrating, but it does happen. Dead batteries, weak signal, poor weather, configuration issues. And I think really this is my number one, is mistakes due to impatience. I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation the top number one quality to have as an install leader, or to develop as an installer, is patience. And a lot of the things that go wrong, you know, might not have gone wrong if I were just more patient. I stopped to think for a second, consider the options, and then proceeded. Chris has already mentioned the crimping errors as well. But then I think, you know, to kind of close, I want to talk about the top 10 what went right, also the things that made installs go really well. First thing is just a positive attitude. Things do go wrong occasionally. Things do drag on. I'm really happy to say that almost everyone I've installed with maintains a pretty positive attitude, remains patient and encouraging, and it's, you know, it just makes a world of difference. Patients have already mentioned, I'll mention it again. People being proactive. Now, you know, on your first install, you'll probably do a lot of shadowing and watching, but it's also great to just say, hey, I'd really like to do this task, or what can I do next? Or, you know, I have an idea for this. And that proactivity, getting into the habit of being proactive, thinking of yourself as not just like learning by watching, but learning by doing, is a great way to start building up your skills to becoming an install leader. Another thing that I really like is when I'm training new people and they bring extra equipment. That saved me a few times. You know, as an install leader, I feel responsible for bringing everything, but as you begin to train up, start, you know, acquiring some of your own equipment and bringing that to installs, and it will come in handy. Another thing that brings me a lot of joy on installs is creative install techniques, whether that's mounting or how you pass the cable inside. It's always really awesome when we come up with a new way to do our work. And I also finally appreciate it when the whole team is looking out for each other's safety on the site as well. So that's a pretty comprehensive overview of a typical install process. Not all installs go like that. You know, I basically outlined every step you can do for, you know, if it was a kind of perfect 10 install. You know, not all installs involve quite as much work as that. Some involve more, but that's it, basically. That's all there is to it. So congrats, we've done it. We've finished our install. We've wrapped up everything. And that's everything. So without further ado, I would love to open it up to questions. So if you do have a question you'd like to ask it, you should be able to unmute yourself just by hovering over your kind of presentation or your Zoom controls.
I'm happy to start with a question. Willem, can you clarify, I missed the portion on this being a part of a fuller series. Can you elaborate on what we're expecting next?
Sure. So I think Chris, your presentation will be the next one, right? You're still going before Zach?
No, we switched that. So Zach is doing Networking 101 next Tuesday, and I'm doing the crimping and configuring workshop on April 7th. So it's more like a three-part workshop.
Great, thank you.
Cool.
Okay. I think.
Is there a, you know, I know this virus has thrown everything out of whack, especially scheduling, but are there any hands-on training that might be planned or would be applicable to plan? Because, you know, I'm a really visual learner, and I know that it's helpful to learn or hear all of this stuff in the ears and into the brain, but when you're touching it and you know, on that rooftop, it's really instrumental. So I know we've done that in the past, but are there any plans for the future, or maybe after this series is completed?
You want me to take that one? Well, so yeah, the idea with this was supposed to be an in-person training, and we wanted to break it into small groups of no more than 10 people. The idea was to do a mock install in an indoor environment, you know, meeting and go over pretty much the whole thing. So possibly after this craziness is over, we'll be able to set that up, and I'll know, you know, Willem and Jillian will be organizing something.
Yep.
So yeah.
Great, good answer.
And again, I think I mentioned this before, but you know, 90% of what I presented today, you know, you will learn that on an install. You know, when we are able to all leave our homes, you'll be able to learn on your feet with your hands just by signing up on Slack to join an install team. So you'll see all of this again when you get out onto a rooftop.
Yeah, for me personally,
Yeah,
I've followed a bunch or tagged along on a bunch of installs, and crimping and the physical aspect of it, or the practical aspect of it, I'm totally confident in. It's just the configuring and the laptop portion of the software interface portion that I'm totally new to.
Yeah, I think, you know, kind of in the future, we've been discussing how to better onboard people beyond just the going on an install on site. And yeah, there are really kind of two additional trainings that everyone should go through. And right now, the way that happens is very ad hoc and informal.
Right.
And really depends on who you have as an install leader. One of those is, as Chris mentioned, you know, and is going to show online the configuration part of it. And the other part of it is the kind of back-end process of working with the master spreadsheet and getting signed up for the inventory and doing the ticket management and all that kind of stuff. So what I've done a few times is with people I've installed with and trained, I will propose having like a mini, you know, like a less than 10-person meeting that Chris kind of mentioned. And I'll just invite people who I know are invested enough and have gone on a few rooftop installs to do that additional training. But, you know, every install leader is different, and I haven't tried to like institutionalize that as something that everyone goes through. So we're kind of working on that, I think. And, you know, for now, remote is the best we have, but of course we will want to do more in person in the future.
Great. Well, thanks for this, guys. I'm going to bounce out, but have a good night and be well to all.
Okay. Thank you so much, Alex, for joining.
Yeah, thank you.
Any other questions on the line, comments?
All right. Should we wrap it up?
Yeah,
Oh,
I guess so.
I guess
Unless
we're-
I'll wait maybe another 30 seconds in case anyone has one more question. You're
All right.
you're also free to reach out to us on Slack afterwards as well. To sign up for Slack, just go to our homepage and there's a link to Slack right down at the bottom, and you can find us there. Again, my name is Willem Boning. This is Christian Gutierrez, and who goes by Chris Tech. I see his name in the
Slack.
sidebar. And feel free to ask us any questions after the presentation. I'd be thrilled to answer them.
Thank you,
Okay.
Willem, for
Thanks, everyone, for
organizing
joining.
this.
And yeah, thank you for participating too, Chris. I can't wait for your presentation. It's super exciting. And I'm sure I'll learn some new stuff from that too.
Great. Good
Okay.
night, everyone.
Bye, everyone.